People who are dark of the blue, those that escape around us and let what others say come true. Which is but another, they all together. A voice grown up just Peace, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Darker Than Blue. It is Friday, December 5th. Oh my gosh, it's December already. There's a lot. There's so much going on, y'all. It's hard to keep up with everything. It's been very difficult to keep up with everything going on. I can't even describe all of the craziness, the surprise decisions. What you just heard in the little news break about the Supreme Court agreeing to hear the case that Trump has submitted for ending birthright citizenship. This is supposed to be settled law. You know how all the time the folks before this regime, all of the politicians, didn't matter which political party they were a part of, they all made a big old deal about settled law. Everything the Supreme Court decides is settled law. And didn't that always make you feel like, all right, that's just it, and it's not going to change? Well, here we are with people on the edge of their seats, very, very afraid that the constitutional concept of birthright citizenship, that if you're born in this country, you are a citizen of this country, even if your parents are not citizens of this country. Aside from that just being a humane thing to do, if you would even want to enshrine that in law, there's a whole nother conversation that I would want to have about that, but I'm not in charge, so okay. But yeah, the idea that all of a sudden now we could be living in a country in which the very basis of whether you're a citizen or not, could be yanked away by this Supreme Court. And look, it's not like we haven't tried to tell people for quite a while that this could happen, this might happen, that this is probably coming, especially since this is not the first time this man has been around. He's been talking about this since his first administration. And there are people who are convinced that because they are the descendants of enslaved people here, as if people who are enslaved or who were brought to this piece of land to be enslaved are somehow different or better or special, more special than all of the rest of our relatives who were dropped off somewhere else at the same time, for the same reason, by the same people. But somehow there are some among us who believe that because we were dropped off here, or our ancestors were dropped off here, that makes us special and different and unique from the rest of our people who were brought from the same place for the same reason. So that's something that I wish we did not have to talk about. I wish we didn't have to pay attention to, but here we are. But isn't everything that we're dealing with right now, isn't everything like the things that we wish we were wrong about? Yes, I do feel like most of what is going on right now in this country are things that we organizers, we left organizers, we anti-imperialist organizers have been saying for a long time. These things have happened. They have been happening to some degree in the background, so to speak. The liberals, the Democrats have been doing some of these things, many of these things in a nicer way, but they certainly have built the infrastructure and laid the foundation and then applied a few layers of epoxy and to make things look shiny and much nicer than they really were, when they were really doing the same things. They were just not doing them in as mean and an overtly racist or xenophobic way. But just because you don't call me a name when you violate my rights, it doesn't mean you like me any better. So that there is just so much going on at once. I cannot talk about it by myself. So I am so glad that I am able to have this conversation with you all tonight with, I hope he is there. He was there a minute ago, with a good friend and comrade to get us really, really grounded in these issues. And it is our friend, our comrade, the founder, one of the co-founders of the Black Alliance for Peace, and the founder and organizer of the People's Centered Human Rights Project, the North-South Project for People's Centered Human Rights, a project of the Black Alliance for Peace. I'm not going to call you the nickname we have for you, comrade, Ajamu Baraka.
I'm glad to be here. Sorry, I'm a couple of minutes late.
No
But
worries.
it's always a joy to have a chance to talk with you about national and international politics and other things.
Yeah, this is critical right now, Ajamu, because in the Black Alliance for Peace, we have been organizing for 8 years under the campaign, No Compromise, No Retreat, Stop the War on Africans, at home and abroad, or here and abroad. And we're also organizing under the justification for that campaign that we are at war. And we've been saying that for 8 years. And truly, our people have been saying that for decades, if not centuries, since we've been here. But I think that what we are seeing unfolding in full in this regime is almost, it feels like to me, a full representation of that war. Right before we're at the precipice of like a kinetic situation. But how do you see the unfolding of all of these concurrent events? We're not going to be able to get to everything tonight, but certainly Venezuela, Congo, China, Somalia, and domestically, this birthright citizenship case. How do you see all of this happening at the same time, unfolding at the same time, in the context of no compromise, no retreat, stop the war on Africans here and abroad, and we are at war?
We say we are at war because we have been in a constant struggle from the time that we were brought to these shores. But that war has had ebb and flows. There's been constant repression, no question about that. But the intensity of it has ebbed and flowed. And it's done that because of the fact that we played a certain role in the evolution of this economy, the development of this country. We played a certain role when we were able to mount effective resistance. We had to deal with the consequence of the reaction from the state when we did that. But this period today, Sister Jackie, is I think unique in the sense that we are in a moment of intensified struggle, intensified warfare, because the crisis of the system has become so acute that the pretense of it being in any way committed to ideals of justice and democracy and human rights, they've been completely jettisoned. And what we see now is the naked expression of aggression in order for this system, in order for the capitalist system, the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, to maintain and attempt to expand its hegemony. And we say crisis because since 2008, we have seen just that. We've been immersed in a crisis of not only capitalist legitimacy, but the functionality of this capitalist system. All of the contradictions that have created the economic conditions that we face and that the general working class faces sort of spiked in 2008 when we had the basically the collapse of the system and the emergency measures that they put in place to try to save the system with quantitative easing, pumping dollars into the system, and then trying to pay us off in terms of not engaging in direct vote, shifting more social spending toward the masses. But with all of these measures, um, the contradictions continued and they only intensified. Why? Because of the irreversibility of these contradictions. That the this era of neoliberalism that created this enormous gap and material wealth between the masses of the people and this rapacious minority ruling class, with the solution with the development of economic and political power outside or beyond the control of the U.S. state, that has put enormous pressure on their economy and their ability to be able to engage in their parasitic exploitation, has created conditions in which there's no reforms for the system. And therefore, the only way that they are able to maintain themselves is through violence, state violence. This was the analysis we made in 2017 when we launched the Black Alliance for Peace. We said and we laid out that our analysis suggested to us that the system had no other direction to go but to engage in more intensive repression, more terroristic state violence, both domestically and internationally. And that is what we are seeing played out today. And both parties have been involved in this process. This notion that the Democratic Party presents some type of opposition to this logic is just an inaccurate, false analysis. That this is a trajectory that the system has been on, and and is being supported by most of the elements of the capitalist class. So, I know I said a lot, but basically what we're seeing is that we're seeing the contradictions of this colonial capitalist system play out in real time. We are immersed in it. And it's only going to get more intense because what we are, in fact, immersed in is a new form of fascism, neo fascism, if you will. Has been developing for the last few years and is now beginning to really consolidate, really under the Biden administration first.
Mm-hmm.
As many people know who have been following my writings, I've been making a warning for the last few years that the leading edge of neoliberalism has been the leading edge of fascism. And we saw that be beginning to come together under the Biden administration. And so the Trump forces have only built off of those kinds of elements that have been put in place over the last 10, 12 years.
Yeah, 10, 12 years. And that would include the vestiges of the Obama administration, would it not? I mean, we've talked extensively about and analyzed his administration, his two terms, and their unique role in a particular type of propagandizing of Black voters and citizens, or Black people, because now the question is, are we citizens or are we not? But his administration is pivotal in this fascist consolidation that we're seeing now, because he was just charismatic enough to convince us, to a lot of us, to go along with it. Ajamu, isn't that basically a characterization of his administration?
It really was because that he stepped right into the middle of the crisis, the economic crisis of 2008, and when he took power in 2009, his administration had the responsibility of attempting to manage that crisis. They have both a material objective, but also an immaterial one, also, which was basically to convince the public that the system was could be repaired, and that there was no need for any more radical analysis and a radical solution to the system, because you needed to have hope, and the hope was in office, and they were going to address the issues that the working class was facing, the issues of the continuation of this colonial relationship that many states had to the empire. That things are going to get better, but what we see in the Obama administration is the beginning of the desperation on the part of the capitalist class. There is not a coincidence that that administration ended up being one of the most aggressive in terms of U.S. foreign policy and pursuing the instrument of war, which is ironic because he came into office with the Nobel Peace Prize.
Right.
But they are operating off of a different kind of logic that goes beyond the individuals. And so this administration, was committed because of what was reflected also in the documents of the state that said basically the way that we are able to maintain hegemony and to get through this crisis is that we had to have a policy of full spectrum dominance, that we had to ensure that we maintain the relationships between the empire and the various states, that we were able to maintain domestic order. And what that meant was the use of violence, of state violence, both on the international level and domestically. So it was no coincidence that you had coups in Honduras and in Egypt, undermining the expression of democracy on the part of those peoples. That you had Libya that was attacked and destroyed, the most prosperous nation on the African continent. That you had the Obama administration embracing the Saudis to the extent that they provided enormous support and gave a green light to a genocidal war in Yemen.
Mm-hmm.
That the Department of Defense 1033 program, the program responsible for transferring military equipment from the military to the police forces, that there was a 2,400% expansion of that program under the Obama administration.
Yeah.
It's not an accident that with all of the killings that were taking place during those years by the police, that the Obama administration only prosecuted one of these killer cops. It was not an accident that on the African continent, you had a 1,900% expansion of the U.S. African Command.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So the commitment to doing what needed to be done to maintain the colonial capitalist system, in other words, white power, is what the Obama administration was tasked with the responsibility to carry out. And it did that, with enthusiasm. So you're right. It was a logic that drove that administration, and part of that logic was to try to galvanize domestic support for those policies, and that's exactly what he was able to do for quite some time.
Yeah. So now we have a an American society that, for several reasons, not just his administration, but I feel like and especially the way you just explained it, Obama's administration pushed an already anti-intellectual, not focused on foreign policy at all, not really concerned about the condition of other people in this country who are not them and not related to them. They have a very apathetic population in this country when it comes to how other people are living and how other people are doing, not even just around the rest of the world, but other people literally in their own hometown who are not living in their house. And I feel like Obama really just pushed people in this country into a new level of apathy that has made this current situation, I think, more frightening. Because here we are, Ajamu, at a point where the US government is threatening to militarily attack Venezuela, warships in the Caribbean Sea, threats of a ground invasion, Caribbean leaders colluding with the US, but also at the same time, the US is making deals or making weird, bizarre offers to Venezuela and China, because I think the government, this government under Trump, and I think the US government in general, understands that they can't win a kinetic war against China. So but they still want to demonize them. So they are making these clearly desperate moves. But these desperate moves are bringing us literally at the precipice of a hot war with people or countries that I don't think that a lot of people had on their radar. Like, who had on their radar the United States bombing Venezuela or threatening to bomb Venezuela when the focus of the government has been China, Russia, and other countries up until now. So how do you contextualize what this government is doing in regard to Venezuela, and now oddly bringing in China into their tactics, strategy, whatever the tactics and strategy are, because they make no sense, but the Trump administration is making these, they're not even overtures, they're threats to Venezuela and China. What is your take on this? Because it's truly a bizarre situation, John.
Well, it's interesting that well, two things. One, when you say we're not sure who had on their radar the possibility of a direct confrontation between the U.S. And Venezuela, and we would remind your listeners that the Black Alliance for Peace had it on its radar.
Yep.
Because again, we understood the trajectory of policies by this settler colonial state and the contradictions that were in play. And so we understood and were trying to warn people that as soon as the U.S. was able to extricate itself to a certain extent from the so-called Middle East, or what we correctly refer to as West Asia, that they're going to refocus their attention on Venezuela. Why Venezuela? Well, Venezuela is key to the entire Americas region. People have to be reminded, and I think lately people have understood, because if they didn't know it, they know now with all of the attention, that Venezuela is sitting on top of the largest reserve of petroleum on this planet. Okay. Now, just look at the kind of wealth and spending as a consequence. We see nations engaged in, like the Saudis or Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Qatar. They spend, they're wealthy, but what they are doing is perpetuating the international capitalist system. They're not revolutionaries. Their people are not benefiting directly from the incredible wealth that these ruling classes have, these monarchs have. But the Venezuelans, who had the potential of being able to generate incredible wealth, were blocked. And how were they blocked? Through illegal sanctions. They were the recipient of all kinds of subversive activity on the part of the U.S. intelligence agencies to undermine their project. Why? Because Venezuela was attempting to build an alternative to the global colonial capitalist system. They were attempting to build or lay the foundation for a transition to socialism. And they had the wealth, they had the connections, and that was not going to be allowed to take place. That kind of model had to be smashed. And that's exactly what the objective is with Venezuela. When you have Venezuela healthy, is able to and did and still does provide some degree of support to who? The Cubans,
Mm-hmm.
Nicaragua, okay, to Haiti. It provided a safe place for radical and revolutionary forces from across the region to gather and to organize and to analyze and to strengthen themselves. And as a consequence of that, they had to be stopped. And so that is why we have this armada off the coast of Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
We have it because of the threat of Venezuela and the attempt to continue to undermine that state. But we have it there also because of the complete erosion of any kind of commitment to anything called international law. That what we are now engaged in, what we now see, is a U.S. state that is operating beyond the boundaries of law. It is operating as a rogue state. It has completely rejected all of the niceties and respectability of trying to frame what it's doing within the context of international law. They don't give a damn.
Mm-hmm.
They say we have the military power and we have the objectives and we're going to pursue it, and we don't care what anybody says, and you can't stop us. Which is understandable. They just help to facilitate and continue to facilitate an ongoing racist genocide,
Mm-hmm.
a genocide that we have watched in real time unfold before our eyes. So this kind of gangsterism is what is characterizing the international order at this time. And so there is a complete logic to everything that they're doing. This is, again, their response to the inability to control things economically like they used
Mm-hmm.
to impose their will like they used to. So what they're now using is the military card that no other nation or even group of nations have the ability to withstand. And so this, again, is what they're using. And that process of identifying China is also logical.
Mm-hmm.
Because basically, what other state on the planet is a rival to their power? It's the Chinese,
Mm-hmm.
and behind that you have the Russians, and you even have the EU that's starting to find its footing, understanding that this American First policy of the administration is a policy that is not to their benefit, something that has taken them a long time to understand. We talked about within the Black Alliance of Peace, we talked about the U.S., EU, NATO axis of domination,
Mm-hmm.
that interconnection of these forces representing organized white supremacy. But the contradictions of the colonial capitalist system has been that those contradictions have emerged within that structure. Everybody's going for themselves to a certain extent. So there's a logic in this, and people need to understand that Trump is not great. I mean, the fact of the matter that the ruling class pulled behind him in terms of just follow the money, folks.
Mm-hmm.
With the donations. Look, it was clear that basically the soft power of Obama was basically ineffective. The Biden administration was bungling and incompetent, and what capitalists have done in the past, in the 1930s, is I think a dramatic expression of this. When there is a crisis as we are facing today, they have turned toward fascism.
Mm-hmm.
And what is fascism? Fascism is, in fact, a capitalist reform. It is the last desperate attempt to maintain the control and rule of capital. So the turn toward Trump is a logical one, and we need to understand that, and we need to be able to analyze what are going to be some of the next steps in this consolidating fascism.
Yeah, I'm glad you explained the capitalist logic of the capitulation to Trump. That the Democrats said this man was basically Satan. That he is the devil incarnate. He is Hitler 2.0. But what resistance has there been from the Democrat Party? Not like we expected resistance. That's just a rhetorical question for people who are listening, because I'm not asking that question. But there are questions about the way some leaders in other countries, particularly on the continent, are still just bowing down to Trump, hat in hand. He makes an offer for a deal, and they say, "Yes, a boss, I'm gonna take it." What I'm thinking particularly of the deal, the quote unquote deal that was just made for minerals and resources between the Trump administration and the Democratic Republic of Congo. How does such a deal happen if Trump is, if he's the devil incarnate, if he's Hitler 2.0, if he is Bull Connor reincarnated, if he is the racist fascist devil? How does the African leader in Congo, and of course I know what the answer is, but this is what I'm sure people want to know, because they don't understand the concept of comprador leaders and collusion with the US and puppet governments. But how are we supposed to contextualize a deal between this particular administration and the current president of the Congo?
We understand it in terms of the differential in power relations.
Mm-hmm.
That the U.S. is still a hegemonic force, that it has enormous power, it has the ability to impact a nation's economy, and the so-called deal is no more than a continuation of the deal already in place.
Mm-hmm.
Look, the conflict in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo is a conflict, is a mineral conflict. It's always been an economic war.
Right.
And the minerals have ended up where? In the U.S. and in Western Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So M23 and the role of Rwanda, they are just the ground troops for the exploitation, for the quote unquote rape, if you will, of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Now, the Congolese president understands that, but they felt like they had no other choice but to engage in this charade, especially if there's a possibility that with the relationships now be more normalized, that there could be a dissipation of some of the violence. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll just allow themselves to be ripped off, because that's in fact what that so-called deal represents.
Wow.
Okay. But everybody's not on board. That's why you have the continuation of the conflicts, the warmongering in the eastern part of the Congo. This so-called deal was more a public relations stunt than anything else, because these forces involved in the struggle, some of them are uncontrollable. And so, having even a sort of a normalized rate of Eastern Congo was not in the interest of some very powerful forces. So all of this is a reflection of the fact that there are these terms that people need to understand that you reference, like compradors. These comprador leaders, these leaders that are supposed to be in charge of their states, but they basically are just what we call neo-colonial puppets. The colonial relationship between those states and their colonial masters, and their masters that have gone beyond just that one colonial master, but to the entire Western world. Mm-hmm. They are put in place, and they are propped up because their role is to basically to facilitate the exploitation, the rape of their countries. Okay, and what they get from that, they get their presidential plane and their palace and their wives and riches and a vacation in Europe. And when they leave office or push out of office or whatever, they go and retire in Europe. Okay, that is the character of much of the leadership on the African continent, and that's why you have the rebellions taking place now, coming primarily from the youth in places like Kenya, in Cameroon, in the Gambia, in Senegal, that resulted in this new young administration in Senegal. You know, the youth of the African continent are saying no more. We want to see real changes. And that's why you have the existence of a U.S. Africa Command. They're not there to fight so-called terrorists. Well, they are to a certain extent, because the terrorists that they are facilitating the fight against are the people, the people in these countries who want to see some kind of political change.
Right.
And that's why we take the position that the U.S. And NATO, they need to be ejected from the African continent. So we participate in this global, national, and class struggle, because that's what we have. This crisis that we are talking about is a reflection, again, of these contradictions, these national and class contradictions. The international bourgeoisie, the international capitalist class, largely housed in the U.S., but also is connected to the bourgeoisie in Western Europe. They are serious about trying to maintain their hegemony.
Yes.
And so they work with and work through their class partners, these comprador leaders in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia. So we have to understand the terms of this struggle. So Donald Trump is put in place by these international forces, this international bourgeoisie, to not only control politics in the U.S., which is important because the U.S. is the center of an empire, a global empire.
Right.
But I make the argument in this last piece that I wrote a couple of weeks ago, a week ago, that what we see with the capitulation of the United Nations, basically voting in the UN Security Council to give a mandate to Israel and the U.S. to govern Gaza, represents the final capturing of all of the major international institutions that were put in place at the end of the Second World War by the U.S., by international fascism. Because settler colonialism and the colonial capitalist system is in fact fascism. Okay? So, these are the terms of struggle that we have to understand. And we have to understand that because we have people who want to pretend that all we need to do is now bring in some Democrats, that there's going to be some change. That even some social Democrats like Mandani are going to provide an alternative. Well, we understand the role that social Democrats have always played at these moments of crisis. That instead of helping to galvanize the people going toward socialism, they have served as a brake. They are the ones that have articulated a reform agenda that they will argue you can address some of the issues like affordability within the context of the existing system. Well, we say no. The capitalist system is bankrupt.
Yes.
It cannot address the issues of the masses of the people globally. There's a reason why we have 3.5 billion people living in abject poverty in countries that are governed by capitalists and capitalist compradors. Okay, the system is unable to address the needs of the people, and the bourgeoisie understands that. That's why their reaction is militarism, repression. So people need to understand the terms of struggle. But basically, we are in a fight. And as I started off, the war has in fact intensified. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to understand that, and we need to prepare ourselves for that. But if not, then we are going to be in a lot of trouble. Right now, we make the argument that this United States of America and its allies represent an existential threat to global humanity because they have taken a position that basically either we are going to control things, we're going to be dominant, or we're going to create the conditions to blow up the entire planet. And that's exactly what they seem to be trying to do.
Definitely. We have to take a little station break right now. You know what time it is, y'all. We're a little bit past our mark, but that's okay. The conversation is important and it's really good. But we do have to take a station break. So, engineer extraordinaire, what do we have on tap for the people today?
Thank you to everyone who supported WPFW on Giving Tuesday. Your generosity helps keep independent, listener supported radio strong. If you weren't able to give earlier this week, there is always time. Every contribution at any level helps sustain the music, culture, and progressive voices you hear on WPFW every day. Our end of year drive begins Sunday, December 14th. For listeners with IRAs, this is also a reminder that year-end required minimum distributions are approaching. A qualified charitable distribution may be a meaningful way to support WPFW while meeting your RMD. However you choose to give, thank you for standing with community people-powered radio. Please call 202-588-9739 or visit WPFWFM.org to learn more. WPFW, building a better world, one broadcast at a time.
Thank you so very much. And we have returned for this conversation. Please go to very quickly tomorrow. There is an emergency demonstration in support of Venezuela at the White House. Please go to the Answer Coalition website and the Black Alliance for Peace website for information about that. So, Ajamu, I want to turn in the last 15 minutes we have to domestic issues because, I'm sure people listening are saying, oh, that's so terrible that this government is doing these awful things to those people in other countries that don't have anything to do with us. But as we understand in the Black Alliance for Peace, there's no such thing as international issues that are disconnected from us. And I see this announcement from the Supreme Court that just happened today, like almost right before we came on the air for this show. The Supreme Court has decided to hear the case of Donald Trump trying to end birthright citizenship. They just made this announcement today. Margaret Kimberly has written about this issue and how it will impact Black people, African people in this country, despite some segments of Black folks in this country believing that they're American. They are the descendants of the enslaved people, of the African people who were brought here to this particular piece of land. And because we are the descendants of the people who were brought to this particular piece of land, we are special, we are unique, we are wrapped up in that American exceptionalism, and therefore we are American, and they need to start treating us like Americans and give us our reparations. But I question what you have to say about that segment of our people in light of the Supreme Court now saying they're going to take up this case and review birthright citizenship. What are the implications here for us who think we're American?
Well, I think that what people have to understand is that this is part of the agenda of the radical right to basically redefine the U.S. as a white Christian nation. And we say redefine in the sense that it defined itself in the very beginning as exactly that. So, the redefinition process is something that they are engaged in now because of what they see as those few decades of an attempt to be inclusive of the non-white communities, non-white peoples on this land who now assert themselves as so-called American citizens. So what they are doing is to win back their nation, to take it back to a place where it was understood that the white males were the predominant power, that this land was a land that was given to them by their God, uh, their manifest destiny to rule this land. And so that is the agenda. That's the reason why the Trump administration significantly reduced immigration, except from places like South Africa. And the only group from South Africa that can immigrate to the U.S. are white South Africans.
Right.
Okay? There's a reason why Elon Musk is such a major advisor to Donald Trump. Elon Musk being a product of the white supremacist apartheid system of South Africa. So this attempt to address the issue of the character of the U.S. by attempting to reverse, the 14th Amendment, an amendment that conferred citizenship on the African people who had been enslaved in the country called the United States of America, is part of that effort to not only redefine the U.S., but also to eventually even target the descendants of those peoples who were enslaved and brought to this country and produced the wealth that made this country what it is today. So this is a logical outcome of this agenda. It's a dangerous one because it calls into question all kinds of people's statuses. I was just talking to a brother today who is concerned because the way that executive order is written, individuals who gave birth in the United States but who weren't themselves U.S. citizens, then their children, the people they birthed, now their status could be questionable. And so it's a very dangerous and chaotic situation that they are playing with. One would think that they would not attempt to overturn more than 100 years of practice. But again, you are dealing with an administration and a movement that, in this sense, is not rational. Because when you commit yourselves to white supremacy, that in and of itself is a manifestation of psychopathology. And so these are the kind of decisions that you make when you committed to that kind of framework. So it's a very dangerous development. And I connect that, Sister Jacqueline, to the activity of ICE, the unleashing of ICE across the country by this administration, targeting those cities, those urban areas that are administered by non-white peoples, primarily African Americans and others, with the objective supposedly to identify illegal people and undocumented people in order to deport them from the U.S. Well, we have seen that agenda is not the real agenda. The agenda is to terrorize. It is to reinforce the notion of this being a white society. And now with the move into Minneapolis, where the targets are people from Somalia.
Right.
It's a very dangerous bridge because you go from the focus being on so-called undocumented quote unquote illegal people
Mm-hmm.
to a population in which most of the Somalians are U.S. citizens.
Right. Right.
That's the dangerous bridge that's being connected. And those Africans in the U.S., those African Americans or foundational Black Americans or whatever, who don't understand the danger of this, then they are supremely naive. You got to remind people they put U.S. citizens in concentration camps in the Second World War. Japanese citizens.
That's right.
Okay?
That's right.
And if they can pull off a racist genocide in Gaza, what do you think they can do to your Black behinds?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And you need to understand that as you embrace and wrap yourself in the flag of the enemy, the American flag, and call yourselves proudly so-called Americans. You know, you ain't no Americans. Malcolm said, you know, if kittens are born in an oven, do we call them biscuits? You know?
Right.
You know? Don't tell me because you were born here. So you have to understand, these folks have the power to define who you are. You know?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a dangerous development, my sister. It really is.
And Ajamu, thank you for saying that the way you said it, because what I get, and I'm sure you've gotten the same kind of responses too, when you try to explain this aspect of these folks that are doing this to people, they always say, well, Trump's an immigrant, his children are anchor babies, his wife is an, that doesn't matter. And the idea that people will say, well, the Constitution says, or they'll say things like, well, they can't do X, Y, and Z because the law says A, B, and C. What is your response to all of those, very logical, linear thinking kind of, well, he can't possibly do that because why do people think that these people who are already right now ignoring the rulings of US courts against the way ICE is kidnapping people, the courts are ruling against them and they're not stopping anything? What do you have to say to people who ignore that but still say, oh, they're not going to do it, they're not going to revoke birthright citizenship because the law says?
We remind them that there are Japanese Americans who never thought that they would end up having their property taken from them and then being confined to concentration camps. We will remind people that in the U.S. Constitution, you were not even seen as a person. You were 3/5 of a person.
Mm-hmm.
We remind them that as you see Latino folks being terrorized from ICE, that there was a fugitive slave clause and a fugitive slave act in which white folks were coming into the urban areas where in the North where we thought we were free and stealing people and taking them back into slavery.
Mm-hmm.
We remind them that even after the 14th Amendment that conferred citizenship on us and equal rights, they used that same amendment to justify what? Apartheid.
That's
after
right.
1877. It was codified in 1896 with Plessy versus Ferguson.
Mm-hmm.
There was a law of the land for 54 years. When you are colonized and subjected to the laws of the colonizer, those individuals, that system can change whenever it needs to. You're not safe until you're able to exercise one fundamental human right. What is that? The right to self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have the ability to be self-determinate, to protect your own rights, to define your own rights, then basically you are always going to be subjected to the whims of powers outside of your community. So if people are not talking about using the term of self-determination, when you think about and talk about African people, then basically you are in essence allowing yourself to remain dependent and vulnerable to a psychopathological enemy that will commit the same kind of genocide on you that it committed on the Native Americans and it committing today on the people in Gaza.
That ain't nothing but the truth. 1 minute left, Ajamu. What is going on with the North-South Project for People-Centered Human Rights. The work that you all started the project with was amazing, and I'm not sure that we were expecting the response that we have received, but as the moment has arisen that we've had to meet, certainly things have advanced and expanded in a way that reflects the difficult times, but that are also really encouraging. So what do you have to say for what's going on with the North-South Project for People-Centered Human Rights right now, the next steps, and what we can look forward to?
We are organizing this project to provide support to the ongoing organizing work, to provide an ideological alternative to understanding what human rights are all about. We said we have to decolonize human rights for human liberation. We say that it's the people themselves that define human rights and the people themselves that defend human rights. And so we embrace the core principles of that framework: self-determination, collective resistance, the right to resist, social justice, and participatory democracy. And so we don't just make demands, we create the institutions, the structures to galvanize our power. Because if you're not organizing for power, then you are basically organizing yourself into continued dependency.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Darker Than Blue, Ajamu Baraka, original co-founder of the Black Alliance for Peace, director and founder of the North-South Project, people-centered human rights project of the Black Alliance for Peace, comrade and brother. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all for listening and watching. Everybody on video, hang out for a couple of minutes. Yes, you are owed a little extra, so I'll give you a little extra today. Everybody else on the radio, thank you so much for tuning in. Stay tuned for news, views with Garland Nixon. Until next time, a luta continua. The struggle continues, but if we keep fighting and if we keep telling the truth, I promise you, Victoria Acerta, victory is certain. Peace. All right, now, comrade, you can stick around and we can cuss a little bit, or you can leave and I can cuss by myself. It don't matter.
This is very interesting. I was wondering if we were on video.
Yes.
And so you have it. This is okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep up with the technology, although it's tiring because these kids keep coming up with new stuff, and I don't know how it works.
So now we are on, like,
yes, now we're live, but we're live. We're not on the radio now. We're live now on Black Liberation Media, Facebook, Patreon, and Instagram. Yay!
I know Comrade Anthony is maybe watching.
He should be.
I suggested to him that this is the route to go. This is what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
That because your all shows are so outstanding.
Well, thank you. I know you think I'm long-winded, but it's true. I am.
Well, and so I wasn't sure. That's why I put on my little coat, so I could be respectable for you.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't care because I put on this sweater. I'm like, you know what? Never mind. It's in this chair. I'm short. Can't nobody see what I can. So this whole it's been this whole ADOS FBA conversation has been really difficult. It's been really hard over the past few years because I think there has been such a focus, comrade, on unity for unity's sake. We understand that we are embattled, we're an oppressed people, even those of us who don't believe that we are, a domestic colony. But we do realize that we're embattled, that we are, that we're beaten down by the system and they're fucking with us and all this kind of stuff. So a lot of times we still have this weird attitude, and it's not respectability. It's almost the opposite of it, where I get from an organizational perspective, you don't talk about other organizations publicly, that you don't criticize it. But when we're talking about a movement of people that is clearly counter-revolutionary, that is uplifting the ideology of the empire, and that is diminishing and dismissing the work of revolutionary Africans who came before us in the service of saying they're the ones. The only reason anybody is paying the attention to this issue of reparations is because of us. Fuck all these other people. Fuck Queen Mother Moore. Who the hell was she? I've literally had people tell me that. Like, fuck Queen. First it's like, who? And that's a problem right there. What do you mean you don't know who Queen Mother Moore is? But then it's like, well, fuck Malcolm X because his parents weren't American and all this kind of, fuck Marcus Garvey because he was from Jamaica. We have not been able to really have a serious collective, I guess, conversation about this issue and the way these folks emerged and the damage they have caused in the Black community in general, but specifically in African radical organizing, that little teeny corner of the Black community that we occupy.
Yeah.
What is this moment like in the context of that fight, that years-long fight that we tried to have and then we kind of stepped back from because it's like these people are a little bit unhinged. This is not productive. And now here we are. Like our point is almost literally being proven.
Well, I'm gonna tell you something. I think you're right, because I think what some of us did a few years ago was we just kind of ignored it. My whole thing was they're so outrageous, they're so profoundly ignorant that there's no way that it could really catch on. Even though I understood that there were some elements there that could be attractive to some of the more underdeveloped elements of our people. But as the crisis has intensified, and as the need for an effective response from our people emerged in a much more serious way, this element has become now a real detriment, because it is really, as you characterize it, it really is a counter-revolutionary force. They are, in fact, carrying out the agenda of the enemy. One of the objectives of the enemy has always been to try to ensure that there was a disconnection between Africans in the U.S. and Africans in other parts of the African world. They've always attempted to undermine that process, as they have attempted to undermine unity among Arabs and everyone else who were facing the power of white supremacy. But the attempts in the U.S. has not been that effective, because we have had these movements, the Guard React movement being just one of them, but probably one of the most important in terms of demonstrating the potentiality of African unity across the African nation. And when we talk about the African nation, we're not just talking about the physical continent of Africa, as important and central as it is. When we talk about the emerging African nation, we're talking about the African peoples,
right,
throughout the diaspora, throughout the so-called Americans, into North America. Okay, and when you look at the Africans in the Caribbean, and you look at the role of Haiti, you look at the contradictions now of Haiti being under the control of European powers. We say that part of our objective, part of our agenda, has to be the liberation of all African peoples and all African nations. So this consciousness that propelled us to take up the mantle of struggle in support of ourselves in North America, but also in support of the anti-colonial African liberation struggles on the African continent, was part of that African revolutionary consciousness that these folks completely reject. Now, I'm going to tell you something, too. It might sound a little liberal, who knows? I'm not even that mad at them. You know why? Because they are the product of this 50-year counter-revolutionary process,
right,
that started in the 1970s.
Right.
And the objective was what? The objective was to ensure that another generation, that I'm proud to be a part of also, revolutionary generation of the 1960s and 70s would never emerge again. Okay? And they had various tactics to do that. One, which now has become the most effective, and people used to argue against you when I would raise this point, but I'm having less people to make that argument now than before. But one of the most effective tactics that was used to undermine our African consciousness, to split up our community, to move us toward freedom, which means when you embrace the culture and the perspectives of your enemy, was forced busing. Forced busing. When they first started pushing this busing concept, they weren't busing a whole bunch of big ass Africans. Think about who they first started busing. It was the kids.
It was the children.
The young folks.
Yep.
How many people you know that would tell you the stories of them having to get up and getting on a bus, driving past their traditional community school is now a shelter, and going to a hostile environment,
right,
where they are a minority. Okay, the first one subjected to that was Generation X. We start seeing some of the psychological consequences of that with that generation toward the latter part of it. The next generation was a generation the millennials. We start seeing how someone screwed up some of those folks up. We've had now 2 generations African, 2 generations of our people being subjected to this process of developing us into quote unquote
Americans. Right.
Okay. And so this is almost a logical outcome of that. Well, basically, you proudly embrace the American flag. I am an American. I helped build this country. And that's it.
Yeah.
I've heard them say, I will fight and die. For what? We still getting kicked up the ass. They still killing us every day.
Yep. Yeah. And then,
we still being subjected to genocidal kinds of policies.
Yeah. Yeah, but then
we're still being mass incarcerated. We still have infants dying every day. We have one of the highest infant mortality rates on the planet.
And their mamas.
And maternal.
That's right.
Mortality rates. Okay? What is it you getting from this system besides a bullshit dream that can't be realized and wasn't realized in the past? Because when they were talking about the American dream in the 1950s, what was happening to us? Why do you think we went to the streets in the 1960s?
Right.
Because we didn't have no damn American dream. And so basically we rose up and started burning down the country. Okay? And they had to suppress us. They had to repress us. So we recognized that all of this was bullshit. And basically we were not going to live without dignity. And if we weren't able to have democracy or self-determination, nobody in this country was going to happen. Okay? So, but they don't know anything about that kind of history.
Nope.
They don't understand the importance of Amalgam. They don't understand the internationalism that's always been a part of our movement, understanding that we can't, assume we can't understand our condition in the U.S. by not understanding the conditions of African people and other colonized people globally, because we are part of the same oppressive system. But who's going to teach them that? Our movement was broken. The continuity of knowledge was broken. And that's what the enemy does. They want to break that the continuity of the revolutionary process of liberatory information and knowledge. Okay? And so you got these kids going to school being taught by white folks and Negroes. And I had kids. I had kids in the U.S. And my struggle was constant, having to explain to Negroes why my kids don't stand up for the national anthem.
Now you got to explain to the people who don't know why you use the word Negro.
Yeah, because they don't know.
Because they don't know.
But
It's
y'all will
like,
use
what you
that term
talking
Negro.
about? What?
Yeah. And we got to remind ourselves that even the term Uncle Tom.
They don't
You
know
know,
what
when
that
I call-
reference is.
When I call Barama Uncle Tom, older people, everybody knew what that.
Yeah.
Okay. But people like Uncle Tom.
A what?
We call a Negro, the flip side of a nigger. Both are creations of the white man, creations of white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. A Negro is the proper, integrationist, attempts to speak properly, who needs white validation,
Mm-hmm.
who needs to be recognized by the enemy, who will in fact fight and die for this country, who will sing the national anthem louder than white folks. Okay, they are a creation of colonialism. We've already had those folks produce, but now we have a much more of those as a consequence of this counter-revolutionary process. The flip side of that are niggas. Niggas who basically have been allowed, it's like Frankenstein's monster.
Right. Running amok.
Who have been created by this system to be enemies of our own people. Who take from the community. Who create conditions where our elders are afraid to even walk in our communities. Who are all about themselves, advancing their own individual selves. And they will do that by any means necessary. They'll pimp you, they'll pimp your sisters. They will do whatever they need to do to get some of the crumbs from the white man. Those symbols of personhood. And I'm not mad at them either. Many of us have gone through some of those stages.
Yeah.
Malcolm was a nigga for a while. I was a nigga for about 3 years.
You sure it was just 3? Because
it was 3 years,
okay.
basically. And so, until I got woke up. I was always relatively woke, because I had a political family. I had the race people on my father's side, the race men and women. And on my mother's side, I had a grandfather who was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party of the U.S. Okay, and I got both sides of that. So I knew better when I entered it, when I went into the streets. At 15, basically. All right. And by the time I was 18 and gone through some stuff and ended up in the enemy's army, that's when I really got exposed to some Africans I knew they existed because I was a reader. And I read about these kind of African people, these kind of cool ass brothers. Because I ended up in Europe, in Germany, and got the last part of the expats who were the artists, the writers, and the revolutionaries, and the jazz women, and I'm like, it opened me up, okay. And that's when I started organizing. I started organizing in the military. I was part of the GI movement. That's a whole different kind of organizing. You can't engage in open organizing.
Nope.
Okay. But I couldn't hide it either. But so I ended up being identified as a leader, which also worked out because these white folks were so crazy. And Jackie, they thought that I was like Malcolm. They thought I could do this and cause a riot.
have all the Africans on the face.
I didn't disabuse them of that idea because that protected me.
Yeah. Let them think you are as dangerous as they think you are, and use it.
Exactly. So so I'm not mad. I'm so when I read some of that stuff, I don't get angry. The first emotion I feel is profound sadness. That this is what's being produced. Because these folks, in particular, the FBAs, are profoundly ignorant. They're not just confused; they just viciously ignorant. I mean, you see some of the stuff they put online where they ridicule Africans on the continent.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
and look, there's no question that we have Africans in the U.S. who were integrated into various indigenous peoples. There's no question about that.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question that we had Africans who ended up here there in the continent who came from Africa.
Mm-hmm.
No question about that. You know, but this notion that some of these Negroes say that they had nothing to do with Africa.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
They straight up indigenous.
Yeah. Yes. Now there's this
Now,
AI image going around. This is one of the reasons AI is going to kill us all. It just really is, because now motherfuckers are creating AI images of Africans in full indigenous everything, hair, dress, everything, talking about this my grandma. Like, what are you? And they're serious though. They are serious about this.
Yeah. So they confuse in the history. Because look, you look at some of the early photographs of indigenous peoples in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And the African influence is quite clear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and particularly look at the Africans like in what became New Mexico.
That's right.
Or indigenous, that is,
Mm-hmm.
In the West, particularly California. Okay, you look at the people of Hawaii.
Yes.
All right,
Mm-hmm.
and it's understandable because who populated the entire earth? Africans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So people get confused. They have partial knowledge and then they run with it because they have incorporated white supremacy and they hate themselves and hate their black part of themselves. They everything but in Africa. You know, and here you ready to identify with the U.S. There's a empire in decline, and you want to embrace only the 40-something million Africans in the U.S. and you got the richest continent on the planet and 1.4 billion African people, and you want to go down with the U.S. It makes no sense. Even with those of them who want to be capitalists. Why? If I was a capitalist pig, I'd be in Africa.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Our communities have been broken up. What are you going to build that's going to be different? It's going to allow you to prosper as a capitalist. Okay. So they just completely confused, but now they're dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Because at a time when we got to be building unity, because these people are coming after us. When we talked briefly about this situation with the Somalian people,
Yeah.
if they are able to get away with prosecuting and terrorizing U.S. citizens, then we next.
That's right.
Because from the point of view of ICE and the Trump administration, you ain't these are when they were still terrorizing black people, non-white people in various cities. They saw them as niggas, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Niggas who spoke Spanish.
Yep, that's right.
And you ain't nothing but a nigga that speaks English, but you're still a nigga.
That's no different from the way they look at Muslims as saying niggas. We are all niggas to the ruling class, to the white supremacist settler colonial. That we are all nigga, all the non-white, and even some of that, even some white folks, because now Russians are niggas.
Well, they've always been niggas. People, yeah. You look at European cinema, their literature. Yeah, they're always damn near subhuman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's part of their issue, part of their contradiction, because you have Russians. All they want to do is be white.
Yes, really badly. Yes.
They didn't have to be in opposition to the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
But it was U.S. incompetence that pushed them away from them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. So I am curious about your thoughts, and I'm not gonna hold you real long. I want to end this time with you with your thoughts on the state of the Black left right now at this moment, because there are a lot of competing ideas. And listen, I've only been doing this serious organizing thing for as long as I have known you. That is honestly the truth. And yeah, I've gone to a bunch of protests since high school. I've always been interested in politics. I was the weirdo who watched C-SPAN literally from the day it aired. From the day C-SPAN came on the air, I was like, "Ooh, what is this? Is this a Senate hearing? Let me see what the white people saying." And that was me in high school. I watched Petey Green's Washington with my mama. That was our Friday night thing. And then I made her watch Headbangers Ball. But I have always been interested in politics, but I didn't realize that I wasn't organized. I didn't even know it was a thing. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't understand that until I met Abdus, who himself was an organizer, and an imam. And then we meet you, and then you start BAP, and here we are. So you've been doing this for a lot longer. You have a lot more experience, and I'm thankful that I'm able to learn from you and folks like Rafiki and Margaret and Jaribu. So there is so much more that you all know and have seen about the development of the Black left, what you just talked about, the fracturing of the Black left by the state. So I'm curious about how you see it now with all of the weird continued counterinsurgency, but also just with kind of the challenges that we face, those of us who are truly anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, the challenges that we face working with our white alleged comrades and allies on the left, while we're also dealing with the continued attacks, overt and covert, by the state, and also kind of dealing with our own struggle, just to fucking stay alive in this shit. What's your perspective on where we are now?
Let me say this. I think that we have never really completely recovered from the assaults from the state that really intensified. They started really in the latter part of the 60s, intensified into the 70s. But we still in place. We're still here. We are not very strong organizationally. No question about that. We don't have the ability to reach the people. I mean, the very fact that as you were developing your consciousness, you didn't have any outlets. You didn't have any connections to people who were doing stuff. You didn't even know it existed.
Mm-hmm.
But that's part of their plan. It was hard for people to link up with movement. Where was the movement? Okay, that's a little bit easier today with this internet stuff, But again, we had that gap of about 35 years or so.
Wow.
So as a consequence, we are relatively weak. But this new generation, the latter part of the millennials and this Gen Z folks, I have supreme confidence in that population. Of course, we have what we talked about a moment ago, the manifestation of the contradiction with these extremist elements that have been produced, these FBAs and others. Okay, but this is part of the struggle. It is to identify those elements that we can work with. It is to create the conditions for people who are struggling with ideals and have questions to be able to link up with us and try to get some of those things answered, to give people an opportunity to make their contributions to their people. People are understanding once again that we have a responsibility to ourselves, to our history, the struggle. That this is not something that is just that some we doing this because we've been because we want to just kind of do something that's hip or whatever. But we have a responsibility because basically we would not be here if it wasn't for the struggles of our peoples before us.
Hmm.
Okay. And our people were not struggling just to be integrated into a colonial
Oh,
system.
say that.
Our people were struggling against an enemy that was killing ourselves, killing our people.
Hmm.
And they wanted to defeat that enemy. That is the revolutionary project that we have entered into. And there's a lot of young people who understand that and are understanding that. One of the reasons why the Black Alliance of Peace took off was because we understood that there were people out there that didn't want any sugar-coated politics.
Hmm.
They didn't want any politics where people talked about we trying to be America and we just want to vote for Democrats and we just want our civil rights or whatever. We knew that there were elements out there that wanted to struggle, that wanted to be a part of our glorious, historic, revolutionary process, and we created the space for them. Okay? And that's why we give people an opportunity to be members of BAP, or BAP to be their organizational home. But we don't engage in sectarianism. We
Hmm.
say if there's organizations, BAP organizations, or others that you are attracted to, join. Because we want people to get organizational experience.
Hmm.
We can't build power without that. We've got to develop cadres. Okay? You don't develop cadres in abstraction, just webinars and abstract conversations.
Right.
People have to have an opportunity to engage and struggle,
Hmm.
to learn the skills necessary to be revolutionaries. Okay, and I think objectively, we say that the verification of your theory is through your practice. So
Right.
we had a theory about what could be built. The result has been we have built something. Okay,
Hmm.
and it exists. So, where we are now, though, Brad, is that we're in a very dangerous place because even I didn't anticipate the speed in which the fascist forces would consolidate under Trump, and we're not ready.
Hmm.
We're not ready organizationally,
Yeah.
and so it's a very dangerous situation, very dangerous environment we find ourselves in right now. And I suspect too that as the pressure intensifies, there's going to be people who are going to drop out,
Hmm.
and run for the tall grass. It's understandable, um, you know, and so we got to start moving toward more core, building more hard core elements so that we can withstand this period of fascism. So yeah, I'm encouraged because we have potential. But I'm also attentive to the fact that this is a very dangerous situation. But we're never going to give up. We're never going to surrender our identity. We're never going to turn our back on our people's history
That's
who
right.
got us this far.
Hmm.
And so, no matter how difficult it may be, there are some of us who are going to struggle until we take our last breath. Okay,
Hmm.
and that spirit is what we have to resuscitate among our people. Okay, and that's a tremendous thing because that's what sustained us.
Yeah.
This commitment to upholding our dignity, this commitment to resistance. Okay, and so we're weak right now, comrade, and confused. We have different levels of experience, but we have what we have, and that is what we're going to work with.
And I feel like even in every successful revolution, I feel like that has always been true though. I mean, because when you study revolution and you realize, oh, well, there's no revolution that was actually started, at least, that included a majority of the oppressed people
Mhm.
so even the people who needed to be free, most of them were not involved in the effort to free them, at least not initially. So is that, for me, that is a point of encouragement. And I know it seems weird, but it helps me feel better knowing that even though it looks hopeless, it's not, because it never has been. This has been the exact picture before just about every revolution that has ever happened. So in that way, I kind of feel like, all right, this fracturing and this confusion and this immaturity and the different levels of development, scary, uncomfortable, pain in the ass to be a leader with, but it's also not the end of the world. This is all that for me. This is almost like the light at the end of the tunnel, because
It's all part of the process.
yeah,
It's part of the process, and the masses of the people, more and more will be involved, and you have to win the people over, even if they're not actively involved, for your process to be successful. That's why they're not going to be able to defeat Venezuela, because when you have a revolutionary project where you have at least a generation and a half, like what we have right now in Venezuela, it's very difficult to reverse that, because when the people have tasted dignity, freedom, and have struggled to build their project, the only way that they can be defeated is physically.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing that the fascists in Israel seem not to understand. That basically you're not going to defeat the Palestinian people unless you are able to successfully exterminate all of them.
Every
and even then,
mm-hmm.
there's going to be whoever's left is still going to have the spirit of resistance.
That's right.
Okay? And that's what we carry. We carry the spirit of resistance, in our hearts and in our bodies, in our minds. And when you have that spirit of resistance, they can never break your dignity. And that's what we are going to depend on. And that's what's going to get us through. Our people are ready. Because look, the dream is no longer sustainable. It never was. And people are raising questions, and we're in a position to help them to understand their own plight. Then we'll win more and more of our people over to an understanding that we've got to change the system. There's no reform of fascism, basically.
Right.
And that means that you sacrifice yourself for your people, for the next generation.
And I think that one of the pictures I saw today in Venezuela was of grandma with her rifle and her granddaughter with hers. And they were both standing there like, fuck around and find out. Because we will never give up our dignity and our freedom. And I agree. I think that those of us who don't realize that we carry that in us, something will compel that spirit to rise up in folks who don't think they have it. Unfortunately, I think whatever that thing is going to be horrible, because look at where we are now, and we're still, but that is organizing. That is the process, and even when it seems the most hopeless, that's when I really have to look back on our history, rely on what I know to be true that our people have done, to know that we will do it again. We just have to keep at it. So thank you so much for the interview, the official interview, and hanging out with us a little bit later. Our folks really appreciate it, and we'll see you in the streets. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And thank you so much. And thank you for all the work that you do. And so let's keep on doing what we got to do, because we have nothing but history to guide us. And we are going to win this war, no matter what happens to some of us. So thank you, my comrade, my sister, and we'll be in contact.
You bet. All right, y'all. That's it. No more cussing tonight. I got to finish this manuscript. Goodbye.